Now, you see that on the slide, I'm described as coming from 4 different universities. So we bring them all together in an international virtual centre for work and learning. But those countries are not the same. So even if we can use the same words, even in English, they don't mean the same. And the more I look at this title that Kenneth gave me, Active Aging and a Sustainable Society, a comparison between UK and the Nordic countries, the harder it seems to me to be. This whole business of comparison is not easy. I've been trying for a long time. I worked in Sweden with the National Institute for Working Life, and we had the Work Life 2000 program. Some of you may have participated. We had a superb workshop there, led by Åsa Kilborn, about active aging in the workplace, the aging workforce. I've carried on, I've been working with the Norwegian Centre for Senior Policy, who were referred to earlier today. We published a book last year, Older Workers in a Sustainable Society. So, I know that we can describe the work in Sweden, we can describe the work in Norway in English. I know we can bring together collections of work from different countries so that we can at some level compare them. But that is not enough. Now, how do I turn this one down? Okay? Okay. Let me give a disclaimer. I am not director of research in this field in the UK. I'm not in the same league as Ingmar here from Sweden. However, as a senior, I can reflect on the fact that I have been getting older. I am now one of those who, on the charts we saw earlier, I'm at that transition stage. I could have retired, but in fact, I haven't. I'm dealing here with a problem that includes me. We have a generation of work-life researchers in Scandinavia, and this is our topic, among others. Aging action researchers, aging work-life researchers. In a sense, the process of aging for people like me is now part of action research, reflecting on what we are doing. Trying to link those debates is not easy. How can we draw conclusions from work in one country and apply it in another? Not easy. There are different contexts, different stages of development in the countries. For example, if you compare what's been happening in Sweden with what's been happening in Lithuania, they come from different histories. They have different kind of issues at the moment. Direct comparison is not easy. We have different contexts. In the different countries, we have different views of what counts as evidence. It's not easy to decide where is the scientific evidence to influence political decisions. Now, in Sweden, I've worked with the Institute for Working Life, with Work Life 2000, with the SALSA program. Now, we might have thought that would lead to great success, but of course, the National Institute for Working Life was closed in 2007. So the fact that there was a great deal of research produced did not produce a lasting legacy. Very important message for those of us in the field. There are many different perspectives that we've been adopting around these issues at the EU level, regional level, in issues like education and work organisation. And in subjects like age, it's been very difficult at times to get agreement. I remember a project we had with the Nordic Council on active age. And even in English, we could bring the words together, but we could not reach agreement. For some people, age had to be looked at in terms of learning. For some, it had to be looked at in terms of health. For others, it was a matter of a changing nature of work life. For others, it was a question of where people are in society. None of these were wrong, but trying to put them all together into one agreed framework, one agreed policy picture across a number of countries did not seem possible at the time. Even with well-intentioned people, you could compare the views, you could try and combine them, but you could not complete the picture as far as we could see. Now, some of this, of course, you can explain by looking at the different political contexts in which we live. Published a book earlier this year called Creating Collaborative Advantage. And in there we look at the differences between liberal capitalism, which if you like has examples like the UK and the US, and you can compare the way that works with the Nordic model in Sweden, in Denmark, in Norway, in Finland. Those countries have much in common as well as having differences. To complicate life, we can refer to the EU social model. We might imagine that all 27 members of the EU who have the same directives, the same European legislation, we might imagine that they in fact have the same way of looking at things, the same way of conducting society. It's not so. There's enormous diversity. So we have a European English that we can use to describe these things, but they're very different. I worked with the Swedish Labour Market Board on a project in Romania, and I assure you that the experts from the Swedish Labour Market Board found that they were dealing with a different kind of country. Whether it was problems of industrial relations or of aging workers, this was a different situation for them to come to terms with. We can have simple views in terms of the myths that we like to believe in, but the reality is often much harder. And that presents complications for us. So, given that problem overall, how can we compare the different situations? Setting one case against another might be easy, but it depends on there being pre-existing objective data. If you go to the different European agencies, the European Foundation, the European Agency for Safety and Health, you'll find enormous diversity in the collection of statistics from the different countries. You can have partial comparisons, but it's very difficult to have a full comparison. I suggest that comparisons work better if you're looking at the context of comparing the experience of people who are trying to bring about change, trying to make a change within a common arena, such as the EU. We had a book called Learning Together for Local Innovation, which was based on that approach, looking at the experience of people trying to bring about change. And that can reveal that you have a single model perhaps in the EU, but there are great differences. Just talking together in a network does not seem to be enough. I was European rapporteur for the European Network for Workplace Health Promotion about 10 years ago. The British government was convinced that we didn't need to take part in this network because we knew all the questions, we knew all the answers, it was history, we didn't need to be there. Which meant that I could be German as the chairman, as the rapporteur, but I couldn't speak for Britain. And there were projects launched from Czechoslovakia and also from Austria looking at older workers. And my country was not taking part. We missed out by not being prepared to be European in that sense. In Scandinavia, there has been great research. I was enormously impressed by the workshop on the aging workforce in 1998 in Stockholm. Asa Kilbohm, Juhani Ilmarinen, Alan Walker, Peter Ward from the UK. We learned an enormous amount of what was going on in the different countries. It was perfectly clear that we from Britain, for example, could learn a lot from Juhani Ilmarinen's work, but it was clear that it was going to be a very difficult job to persuade the British government to listen. A different situation, very difficult to get them to listen. In Finland, I realized that even in Finland, there could be a similar problem. I remember a telephone conversation from the director of the Finnish Institute for Occupational Health, saying, we've done all this research demonstrating the work-based nature of many major illnesses as recorded by the World Health Organization. But he said, the doctors won't recognize our epidemiological data. It is not proving possible to demonstrate the work-relatedness of various problems such as stress because of the nature of the evidence that we're using. I think Ingmar had similar objections to some data that he receives in Sweden. So evidence that researchers are convinced by doesn't necessarily do the job they're hoping to do. Working in Norway with the Centre for Senior Policy, we brought together people from a number of countries, including Sweden, looking at older workers in a sustainable society. And it became clear that, again, the problem was really complicated. All around the world, people were talking about concern for older workers, but they gave very different pictures. Partly it depended where their country was in the economic cycle. If the country was prosperous with a booming economy, they were wanting to recruit older workers into the workforce. If, like Britain, the country was in recession, large unemployment, they weren't looking for extra workers. And the idea of an older workers policy, as in Norway, wasn't of interest. What we did in the UK, we didn't deal with the problem of older workers as such. We recruited workers from the enlargement countries, from the 10 new countries who joined the EU in 2004. They came and took the jobs. We didn't consider what the implications were for older workers. The debate is only now starting. It's a complicated issue, and it's been slow to come in my country. In my country, we're beginning to realize that the issues may be more complicated even than I've said. We have at the moment a Minister for Universities, David Willets, who wrote a book called The Pinch, which is all about baby boomers. And his argument is, we older workers, we don't deserve much in the way of sympathy. We are baby boomers. We had a good time. Younger people are having a much worse time at our expense. We have been causing that problem. We need to be addressing intergenerational relations. Now, again, having that conversation with Ingmar over lunch, we wouldn't necessarily have the same analysis in Sweden. But in UK at the moment, there is big resentment by a younger generation against, if you like, my generation, who have had a better time. I didn't pay university fees. Students who start at my university now pay £9,000 per year fees, plus their living costs, and there may be no job at the end of it. We in the middle, we suffer the jam sandwich syndrome, as I've said. We look after our parents, we look after our children, but these things move on. And it's not just a matter of older workers. The pinch seems to be hitting younger workers too. So, how are we going to address these issues? What kind of recession, what kind of agendas are we going to arrive at? It's clear that there are different agendas for boom and recession. Where countries need more workers, they want to recruit them from the elderly, the disabled, whatever. In Britain in the 1980s, we wanted to use what we called the wasted resource. We were recruiting older workers, working women at home, disabled people, mental health patients. That is not the case now. What I think we'd find now is that many older workers are losing their jobs and employers are not following European regulations on information and consultation of employees. When the research is done about what's happened in the last few years, I think we're going to find difficult things have been going on, and it'll be too late to respond. What we do know is that pension changes have been happening. Older workers are not having a good time. Our retirement age is going up. The contributions we have to pay are going up. The amount of money we will receive in our pensions is going down. Private sector pension schemes are closing. Public sector pension schemes are being cut back. There clearly are major problems for older workers, but until very recently, the government didn't want to consider them because they said we don't have clear evidence that older workers face particular problems in the workforce. And of course, it's governments that determine the questions that lead to the research being commissioned. So we've had a problem of lack of research in that kind of context. I've tried to apply Swedish lessons to the UK, and it's been very difficult. Since 1997, I've been working in both countries, and it's been hard to see the benefits coming out of that. Roland, I think, was at the conference in Malmö for 2001, the Work Life 2000 conference. We had two ministers there, Mona Sahlin from Sweden, I helped write her speech, and we had Margaret Hodge from the UK, and I had to brief her about the conference. And Margaret Hodge, who's a highly intelligent woman, very active in Parliament at the moment, she did not understand the Swedish concern for occupational health. Why are they talking about occupational health, she said. Why this obsession? Because the field is not seen in the same way in the UK. That was reflected in our experience in Salsa. We learned in Britain a great deal about the Swedish traditions of research, and it was quite hard to come back with our own matching offerings. I found, speaking in an Anglo-Swedish seminar hosted by the Swedish Prime Minister on occupational and public health, we could talk to superb Swedish researchers, but we found that the British government was slow to respond in similar terms. There was a gap between the two. And it wasn't because of the lack of intelligence, it wasn't because there was a lack of research, people hadn't engaged. And I think we need to find a way of engaging. 3 slides to go. If we go back to the beginnings of capitalism, we find that Adam Smith wrote 2 books that matter to us. One was A Theory of Moral Sentiment, which provided the moral foundations for work in enlightened Europe. Very similar to the Nordic model. Many people who have been pursuing capitalism since then have been basing their work on the wealth of nations, how to make money in capitalist business. We have ignored the moral foundations of capitalism in Britain for a long time. One of the reasons I like coming to work in Scandinavia is because I find those moral foundations there and being expressed. How can we apply that? I have a suggestion, a proposal, which has to be very quick because we're about to cut over to America. I think that we need to propose a new initiative. We need action and not just words. I think we need to have a senior Olympic Games. We need to encounter the problems of others by engaging with them. In Britain, this is catching the policy wave. You may know we hosted the London Olympics, we hosted the Paralympics. Not an empty seat for the Paralympics. People talking about problems of disability for the first time ever. And they're now saying, what is the legacy? The legacy could be 2 things. It can be just taking down all the buildings, which they've started to do. Demolition has begun. Or we can say, we are the legacy. Seniors are legacy. We ought to be participating. We ought to have an initiative that follows on from future Olympic Games and Paralympic Games and involves seniors. And I have a Gothenburg Declaration, following on from the Dublin Declaration earlier, which I'll read and then sit down. And if you agree, then maybe you'll put up your right hand at the end of it, and Kenneth can take a photograph of you. So, Gothenburg Declaration says the participants at the Conference on Active Age, held in Gothenburg on the 1st of October 2012, propose a new international initiative, the Senior Olympic Games. With demographic change, we older workers, or seniors, have a strategic role in our economies and societies. We have much to learn from different experiences around the world and much to contribute. In the UK, the London 2012 Olympics and Paralympics focused attention on team working, the creation of collaborative advantage, and on excellence. A new focus on disability. To date, there has been less attention given to seniors. This could change with the Senior Olympic Games. Like the Olympics and Paralympics, the Senior Olympic Games will be held in different locations, benefiting from the organisational skills of seniors. Just as the Paralympics have introduced new events and classifications, addressing the needs of seniors will bring innovation. Seniors represent a growing market, which needs to be underpinned by research, resulting in new products and services. We should not underestimate the power of the greying pound, euro, krona, or dollar. Timing is vital. Demolition work has started at the London Olympic Park. There's a debate on legacy in which politicians are now engaged and where seniors offer insights based on long experience. So, we call for the establishment of an international working group to develop the concept of the Senior Olympic Games in time for the international bidding process for the Olympics and Paralympics in 2020. Huh? Do we have a cent? We have a cent.